The Galactic Consortium had stood for 17,000 years, spanning 342 star systems, encompassing over 200 sentient species. It represented the pinnacle of interstellar civilization. Its laws were absolute, its justice was swift, its technological supremacy was unchallenged. Until humanity arrived. The first contact had been unremarkable, really. A primitive species on a backwater world in an unfashionable arm of the galaxy. They had barely mastered faster-than-light travel, their ships held together by what the consortium's engineers dismissively called aggressive optimism and inadequate shielding. The consortium's assessment was unanimous. Humans would take centuries to become relevant, if they ever did at all. That assessment would prove to be spectacularly wrong. Dr. Eleanor Vance stood at the window of her cramped quarters aboard the Consortium Research Station Helix Prime, watching the swirling colors of the nebula that surrounded them. At 47, she had the weathered look of someone who had spent too many years in artificial gravity and recycled air. Her dark hair, streaked with gray, was pulled back in a practical knot. Her eyes, an unusual shade of amber, held the focused intensity that had made her both famous and feared throughout the scientific community. She had been the youngest person ever to earn dual doctorates from MIT, one in theoretical physics, another in xenobiology. She had published more papers before 30 than most scientists managed in a lifetime. And she had been the first human ever invited to join the consortium's most prestigious research initiative, the Omega Project. That had been 3 years ago. 3 years of working alongside species that had been doing science while humanity was still figuring out fire. 3 years of being dismissed, overlooked, and occasionally insulted by colleagues who saw her as little more than a curiosity. 3 years of watching, learning, and waiting. Dr. Vance. The voice that interrupted her thoughts was musical, each syllable carrying harmonic overtones that no human throat could produce. The director has summoned you. She turned to face the speaker. Kethril was a melodyne, their species known for their extraordinary hearing and their ability to communicate through complex tonal patterns. Their body was humanoid but elongated, with iridescent skin that shifted colors with their emotional state. Currently, that skin was a worried shade of deep blue. "Did he say why?" Elena asked, already knowing the answer. No. Kethral's colors shifted toward purple, anxiety. But there are rumors. Your research into dimensional barriers has attracted attention. Elena smiled, but there was no warmth in it. I know. She had known this moment would come eventually. Her work had been too successful, too groundbreaking, too dangerous for the consortium's comfort. For 17,000 years, certain avenues of research had been forbidden. The manipulation of dimensional barriers was chief among them. But Elena had never been very good at following rules. The director's office was located at the very heart of Helix Prime, a spherical chamber that floated in zero gravity at the station's center. Director Vorthon was a member of the Crystalline Collective, his body a geometric arrangement of living crystal that refracted light into rainbow patterns. He was old, even by consortium standards, over 8,000 years, according to the records Elena had accessed illegally. Today, he was not alone. Surrounding him were representatives from each of the consortium's 12 ruling species. The melodyne ambassador, their skin a formal shade of silver. The insectoid Chitin Prime, their mandibles clicking in quiet conversation. The ethereal void dancers, their forms barely visible even in the bright light of the chamber. And a dozen others, each more alien than the last. Elena felt their attention like a physical weight as she floated into the chamber. Dr. Vance, Director Vorthon, said, his voice resonating through the crystal of his body. "Thank you for joining us." "I wasn't aware I had a choice," Elena replied calmly. A ripple of reaction passed through the assembled dignitaries. The Chitin Prime's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. The Melodyne ambassador's skin flushed with disapproval. "You always have a choice, Dr. Vance," the director said. "That is precisely what concerns us." He gestured, and a holographic display materialized in the center of the chamber. Elena recognized her own work immediately, equations and diagrams representing months of research into the nature of dimensional barriers. "You have been conducting unauthorized experiments," the director continued. "Experiments into a field of study that has been forbidden since before your species developed agriculture." "Forbidden," Elena said, "but not impossible." "The distinction is irrelevant. The dimensional prohibition exists for good reason. The barriers between dimensions are not meant to be breached. The consequences of doing so are catastrophic." "So I've been told." Elena crossed her arms. "But you've never actually explained why. In 3 years of working here, no one has ever given me a scientific explanation for the prohibition. Just warnings, just fear." The Void Dancer representative spoke then, their voice seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "We fear because we remember. The Great Collapse, the Dimensional War, the death of worlds beyond counting." "Events that occurred before my species existed," Elena pointed out. "Events that have been sanitized, classified, and buried so deeply that even accessing historical records about them is a crime." "For good reason," Director Vorthen said firmly. "Some knowledge is too dangerous to possess." Elena laughed. It was a sharp, bitter sound that echoed through the chamber. "And there it is, the fundamental difference between humans and the rest of you. We don't believe knowledge can be too dangerous. We believe that the only danger comes from ignorance." "Your species is young," the Chitin Prime said, their translator rendering the words flat and emotionless. "You have not yet learned the lessons that time teaches." "Or maybe we've learned different lessons." Elena met the director's crystalline gaze without flinching. "Humanity has been burning itself for 10,000 years. We've survived wars, plagues, and our own worst impulses. We've split the atom and unleashed forces that could destroy our world 1,000 times over. And we're still here. Because we don't run from knowledge, we learn to control it." "Your species has had nuclear weapons for less than a century," the Void Dancer observed. "You have not yet destroyed yourselves with them. But the mathematics of probability suggest—" "The mathematics of probability," Elena interrupted, "are what I do. And they suggest something else entirely. They suggest that the dimensional barriers you're so afraid of are not natural phenomena. They were created, engineered, and that means they can be modified." The chamber fell silent. Director Vorthen's crystalline body pulsed with colors that Elena had never seen before, patterns that might have been shock or fear or something else entirely. "How much do you know?" he asked quietly. "Enough." Elena pulled a small device from her pocket and activated it. A new holographic display appeared, overlaying the first. "The dimensional barriers aren't walls, they're filters. They selectively block certain types of energy and matter from passing between dimensions. And 17,000 years ago, someone adjusted those filters." The Melodyne ambassador's skin had gone pure white, terror if Elena remembered the color coding correctly. "The Great Collapse," the ambassador whispered. "You're talking about the Great Collapse." "I'm talking about what really happened during the Great Collapse," Elena corrected. "The official history says the barriers were damaged by a war between ancient civilizations, that they weakened and nearly collapsed, threatening the stability of reality itself, that the consortium's founders sacrificed everything to repair them." "That is the truth," Director Vorthen said firmly. "That is a story," Elena replied. "The truth is something else entirely. The barriers weren't damaged by accident. They were modified deliberately. Someone, or something, changed the fundamental parameters of reality itself, and the consortium has been hiding that fact ever since." "You cannot know this," the Chitin Prime said. "The records were destroyed. The witnesses are dead. There is no evidence." "There is plenty of evidence," Elena said. "You just have to know where to look. The barrier equations aren't random. They're designed. They have a signature, a mathematical fingerprint that points to their origin. And that fingerprint matches the architectural principles used by a species that supposedly went extinct before the Great Collapse. The architects." The name fell like a stone into still water. The reaction among the dignitaries was immediate and visceral. The void dancers flickered and nearly vanished. The Melodyne ambassador collapsed into a crouch, their skin cycling through colors so rapidly it was almost painful to watch. Even Director Vorthen's crystalline form seemed to dim. "That name," the director said slowly, "is forbidden." "A lot of things are forbidden," Elena replied. "I've noticed that the things you forbid tend to be the things that matter most." "The architects are gone," the Chitin Prime said, their usual composure shattered. "They destroyed themselves during the collapse. They were the cause of the collapse. They created you," Elena said quietly. The chamber went absolutely silent. "All of you," she continued, "every species in the consortium. The architects didn't just engineer the dimensional barriers. They engineered life itself. They seeded the galaxy with their designs, created countless species according to their own specifications. And when they decided those creations had served their purpose—" "You cannot prove this," Director Vorthen said, but his voice had lost its certainty. "I can prove it," Elena said. "I have proven it. The genetic analysis is undeniable. Every species in the consortium shares certain base pair sequences, sequences that have no evolutionary explanation. They're markers, tags, serial numbers if you want to be crude about it. You were all manufactured." She paused, letting that sink in. "All of you," she repeated, "but not us." The revelation changed everything. Within hours of Elena's presentation, the Consortium Council had entered emergency session. Within days, word of her discovery had leaked across the galaxy, spreading like wildfire through the extranet. Within weeks, entire civilizations were in upheaval. The consortium's official response was to denounce Elena as a fraud, a liar, a dangerous radical whose claims were baseless and inflammatory. They produced experts who testified that her genetic analysis was flawed, her dimensional mathematics nonsensical, her conclusions the ravings of a species too primitive to understand what it had found. None of it mattered. The truth was out, and it could not be buried again. Elena watched the chaos unfold from her quarters aboard Helix Prime, where she had been confined pending security review. In practice, that meant she was a prisoner. Guards stood outside her door at all hours. Her communications were monitored and restricted. She was allowed no visitors. But she was also alive, which was more than she had expected. On the 47th day of her confinement, the door to her quarters opened, and a figure she had never seen before floated through. It was humanoid, but not human. roughly her height and build, but with skin that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Its features were angular, almost harsh, with eyes that glowed faintly purple. It wore no visible clothing, but intricate patterns covered its body. Tattoos or natural markings, Elena couldn't tell. "Dr. Vance," it said, and its voice was strange, resonant, like Director Vorthan's, but warmer somehow. "We have much to discuss." Elena remained in her chair, watching the stranger with wary interest. "Who are you?" "My name would mean nothing to you, but you have been asking questions about my creators. You have been seeking the truth about the architects." The being smiled, revealing teeth that were too sharp to be comfortable. "I am here to provide that truth." "You're an architect?" Elena asked, surprised by her own calmness. "No, the architects, as you understand them, no longer exist. But I was created by them, as was everything else in this galaxy. I am what you might call a custodian. I was designed to maintain their work after they departed." "Departed?" Elena leaned forward. "So they didn't destroy themselves." "They transcended," the custodian said. "They evolved beyond the need for physical form, beyond the limitations of this dimension. They left this reality behind and moved on to something greater. But they left instructions, protocols. And you, Dr. Vance, have triggered one of those protocols." "What do you mean?" The custodian moved closer, floating until it was directly in front of her chair. The architects created the dimensional barriers to protect their work, to ensure that the species they designed would have time to evolve, to grow, to eventually follow them into transcendence. But they also left a failsafe, a test, if you will. If any species developed the understanding necessary to perceive the true nature of the barriers, to recognize them for what they were, that species would be granted access to the next level. The next level of what? Everything. The custodian's eyes glowed brighter. The barriers don't just protect this dimension from external threats. They also limit the potential of the species within. Your physics, your understanding of reality, the very scope of what you believe to be possible, all of it has been constrained by the barriers. The architects designed it that way, deliberately, to allow for gradual development. But they also designed a way to remove those constraints for any species that proved itself ready. Elena felt her heart rate increase despite herself. And humans have proven themselves ready? You have perceived what others could not. You have questioned what others accepted. You have pushed against the boundaries of your understanding, even when doing so threatened your own safety. The custodian tilted its head. The architects designed the species of this galaxy to be compliant, obedient, willing to accept limitations without question. They did not design humans. Because we weren't designed at all. Correct. Your species evolved naturally, without intervention or guidance. You are an anomaly, the only naturally occurring intelligent species in this galaxy. And that makes you uniquely suited for what comes next. Which is? The custodian smiled again, and this time there was something almost predatory in the expression. The barriers are failing, Dr. Vance. The architect's work is degrading after 17 millennia. Within a century, perhaps sooner, they will collapse entirely. When that happens, this dimension will be exposed to threats it has never faced before. Entities from outside reality, forces that exist beyond the scope of conventional physics. beings that regard the material universe as nothing more than a feeding ground. And you want humans to stop that. I want you to stop that, the custodian corrected. You specifically. You are the one who perceived the truth. You are the one who triggered the protocol. And you are the one who will be given the knowledge necessary to reinforce the barriers, or to remove them entirely, if you choose. Elena was quiet for a long moment, processing everything she had heard. Why me? She finally asked. I'm just one scientist, one human among billions. Why would the architect's protocols choose me specifically? Because you are what the architects sought but could never create, the custodian said. Independent thought, true creativity, the ability to question everything, even your own assumptions. The species they designed can innovate, can discover, can advance, but always within limits, always along paths that were laid out for them in advance. You have no such limits. You see possibilities that others cannot imagine, because your imagination was never bounded by design. And that makes me dangerous. It makes you necessary. The custodian reached out and touched Elena's forehead with one long finger. The knowledge I am about to give you will change everything. It will reveal the true nature of reality. Not just the small corner of it you currently perceive, but the whole of it in all its infinite complexity. It will show you how the barriers work, how they can be modified, how they can be strengthened or removed. And it will give you power that no being in this galaxy has wielded since the architects departed. Power to do what? Whatever you choose. The custodian's touch grew warmer, and Elena felt something stirring in the depths of her mind, a vast presence, an ocean of information waiting to be released. That is the point, Dr. Vance. That has always been the point. The architects believed that true advancement requires freedom, freedom to make choices, including bad ones. They designed their creations to be limited because they feared what those creations might become if given too much power too quickly. But they also left a path forward for any being brave enough or reckless enough to walk it. And if I choose not to accept this knowledge, if I refuse, then you will be returned to your confinement, and another will eventually be chosen, perhaps in a decade. Perhaps in a century. The protocol is patient. The custodian paused. But I should warn you, the barriers are failing faster than expected. The threats from beyond are already pressing against the walls of reality. If you refuse, and no suitable candidate emerges before the collapse, everything in this galaxy will be consumed. Every world, every species, including your own. Elena closed her eyes. She thought of Earth, of the blue marble floating in space, of the billions of lives going about their daily business, completely unaware of the cosmic drama unfolding around them. She thought of her parents, long dead now, who had always encouraged her to ask questions. She thought of her colleagues, human and alien alike, who had underestimated her at every turn. She thought of everything humanity had survived to reach this point, and everything they might still become. "Do it," she said. The custodian pressed harder, and the universe came flooding in. The knowledge was not a simple transfer of data. It was a transformation, a rewriting of Elena's fundamental understanding of existence. For what felt like an eternity, she floated in a sea of information, her mind stretching to accommodate concepts that had no human words, no human analogs, no human precedent. She learned that reality was not a single thing, but a hierarchy of nested dimensions, each one containing and enabling the ones below it. The physical universe she knew, with its atoms and stars and galaxies, was merely the bottom level, a sediment layer of condensed information at the base of an infinite tower of abstraction. She learned that the dimensional barriers were not walls but equations, vast mathematical structures that defined the rules by which reality operated. Change the equations and you change the rules. Strengthen them and reality became more stable. Weaken them and the distinction between dimensions began to blur. She learned that the architects had been the first species in the galaxy to fully understand this truth, and that their understanding had nearly destroyed everything. Their civil war had not been fought with weapons, but with mathematics, each faction rewriting reality to suit its own vision. The Great Collapse had been the result, a near total breakdown of dimensional barriers that had threatened to unmake the universe itself. In the aftermath, the surviving architects had done the only thing they could. They had reinforced the barriers to unprecedented levels, locked down the fundamental equations of reality, and designed species to maintain the new order. Then they had transcended, leaving the material universe behind for realms that existed beyond the reach of physical law. They had also left instructions, buried deep in the structure of reality itself, protocols that would activate under specific conditions, granting chosen individuals access to the architect's knowledge. The hope was that, given enough time, one of their created species would evolve past its limitations and become ready to take on the responsibility of maintaining reality. That had never happened. In 17,000 years, not a single member of any consortium species had ever triggered the protocols. They had come close, sometimes. Researchers who had glimpsed the truth, who had begun to ask the right questions. But something had always stopped them. A failure of imagination, a willingness to accept official explanations, a fear of what they might find. Humans were different. Elena understood that now, with a clarity that transcended mere intellectual knowledge. Humans had not been designed to accept limits. They had evolved in a brutal and competitive environment where curiosity and creativity were survival traits. They questioned everything because questioning had kept them alive. They pushed boundaries because boundaries were obstacles to be overcome, not rules to be obeyed. It was exactly what the architects had hoped for, and it was exactly what the consortium feared. When Elena returned to awareness, she found herself standing on the surface of a world she had never seen before. No, not standing, floating. Her body was no longer physical, no longer bound by the laws of matter and energy. She perceived herself as a pattern, a self-sustaining structure of information that existed independently of any substrate. The world around her was equally strange. It had geography, mountains and valleys, rivers and plains, but the geography was wrong somehow, following rules that had nothing to do with geology or physics. The sky above was not black with stars, but white with something else, a luminous emptiness that hurt to look at directly. "You have done well," a voice said, and Elena turned to find the custodian beside her. Most subjects require far longer to integrate the knowledge. Many never achieve coherence at all. "Where am I?" Elena asked. "You are between," the custodian said. "This space exists at the boundary between dimensions, a place that is not fully inside reality, but not fully outside it either. The architects created it as a workspace, a place where they could observe and manipulate the barriers without being affected by the changes they made. And now I can use it." "Yes, but first you must understand what you are dealing with." The custodian gestured, and the luminous sky darkened. "Look up. Look up." Elena looked. At first, she saw nothing, just the strange whiteness giving way to something darker. But as her perception adjusted, She began to make out shapes moving in that darkness. Vast shapes, hungry shapes. Things that pressed against the walls of reality like predators against the glass of an aquarium. The outer entities, the custodian said. They exist beyond the dimensional barriers, in realms that operate according to completely different principles. They are not evil in any meaningful sense, they are simply other. But their nature is incompatible with the physical universe. Where they exist, matter cannot. Where they feed, reality collapses. They're trying to get in. They have always been trying to get in. The barriers hold them back, but the barriers are weakening. Every year, the cracks grow wider. Every decade, more of their influence seeps through. The custodian's form flickered, and for a moment, Elena saw something beneath its surface. Something mechanical, something that was decaying. I was designed to maintain the barriers in the architect's absence, but I am failing. My systems are degrading. Within decades, I will no longer be able to perform my function. And when that happens, the barriers will collapse. Yes, and everything you know will be consumed. The custodian turned to face Elena directly. This is why you are here, Dr. Vance. This is why the architects left their protocols. They knew that the barriers would eventually need more than automated maintenance. They would need a conscious mind, a creative mind, to repair and reinforce them. A mind that could solve problems the architects never anticipated, adapt to threats they never imagined. But why me? Elena asked again. There are billions of humans. There are minds far more brilliant than mine. Brilliance is not enough. Many brilliant minds have existed among the consortium species, but none of them triggered the protocols. The requirements are specific. A mind that can perceive the truth, that refuses to accept limitations, that is willing to act even in the face of impossible odds. The custodian's glow intensified. You crossed dimensional barriers without any understanding of what you were doing. You challenged the most powerful organization in the galaxy based on nothing but your own convictions. You saw through 17,000 years of deception and cover-up because you could not accept the idea that some knowledge was forbidden. Those aren't abilities, those are character traits. And that is precisely the point. The architects could design species with any intellectual abilities they wished. What they could not design was character, could not create true free will, genuine independence of thought. Those qualities emerge only from natural evolution, from the pressure of survival in an uncaring universe. The custodian paused. Humanity is special not because you are smarter or stronger than other species, but because you are genuine. You are real in a way that the architect's creations can never be. Elena absorbed this in silence, watching the dark shapes that moved beyond the barriers. They seemed to be aware of her now, turning toward her, pressing harder against the invisible walls that held them back. "What do I need to do?" she asked finally. "Learn," the custodian said. "Grow. Master the knowledge you have been given. And then use it to reinforce the barriers, to repair the damage that time and entropy have caused, and to prepare for the challenges that lie ahead." "What challenges?" The custodian was silent for a long moment. When it spoke again, its voice was softer, almost sad. "The outer entities are only the beginning, Dr. Vance. Beyond them lie forces older and more powerful still, forces that the architects themselves feared. The barriers were not just meant to protect this galaxy from external threats, they were also meant to hide it, to make it invisible to beings that would destroy it simply by noticing it exists. And if I reinforce the barriers, those beings will never notice us. That is the hope. But the barriers must be reinforced correctly, or the cure will be worse than the disease. The knowledge you have been given includes everything you need, but it also includes warnings, failures, disasters from the architect's own experiments. You must learn from their mistakes, or you will repeat them. Elena nodded slowly. How long do I have? Difficult to say with certainty. The barriers are degrading at an accelerating rate. At current trends, total collapse will occur within 60 to 80 years. But that could change. If there is a sudden stress event, a surge of pressure from the outer entities, the timeline could compress dramatically. So I need to work fast. You need to work carefully, the custodian corrected. Speed without precision will accomplish nothing. The architects had millions of years to develop their understanding. You have decades at best. It is not enough time for conventional learning. You will need to find other methods. Other methods? The custodian smiled. You are creative, Dr. Vance. I have confidence you will think of something. Elena returned to physical reality with a gasp, finding herself exactly where she had been when the transfer began, floating in her quarters aboard Helix Prime, with the custodian standing before her. No, not standing. The custodian was gone. In its place was a small device no larger than Elena's thumb, hovering in the air. It pulsed with soft purple light, and when Elena reached out to touch it, it attached itself to her palm like it had always belonged there. A voice spoke in her mind. The custodian's voice, but different now, more artificial. I have merged with you, it said. I am now a part of your cognitive architecture. My remaining processing capacity is at your disposal. Use it wisely. Elena flexed her fingers, feeling the subtle presence of the device against her skin. It was warm, almost alive, and she could sense vast stores of information flowing just beneath her conscious awareness. Information that would take lifetimes to fully explore, but that could be accessed instantly when needed. She understood, now, why the consortium had feared human scientists. It wasn't just their curiosity, their refusal to accept limits, their aggressive pursuit of forbidden knowledge. It was what they could become, once that curiosity was given access to the right tools. A human with architect knowledge was not simply a researcher with better data. They were a completely new category of being, a natural mind equipped with artificial capabilities, a creative intelligence backed by 17,000-year-old wisdom. They were, in a very real sense, exactly what the architects had hoped their created species would eventually become. And they had achieved it not through design or guidance, but through sheer stubbornness and luck. Elena smiled. It was time to get to work. The next 3 months were a blur of activity. Elena's first priority was escape. Her quarters aboard Helix Prime were comfortable enough, but she could not accomplish what needed to be done from inside a prison cell. Using the knowledge she had been given, she modified the station's security systems from the inside, not disabling them, but confusing them, making them see her as a consortium maintenance technician rather than a dangerous prisoner. She walked out through the front door, nodding politely to the guards who had been watching her for weeks. They nodded back, utterly convinced that she belonged. Her second priority was resources. The architect knowledge was vast, but implementing it would require physical infrastructure, laboratories, manufacturing facilities, computing systems. Elena could not build what she needed on her own. But she did not need to be on her own. Humanity had been part of the consortium for less than a century, but in that time they had spread throughout the galaxy like a particularly aggressive weed. There were human colonies on dozens of worlds, human researchers in every major institution, human merchants and diplomats and soldiers in positions throughout consortium space. More importantly, there were human networks, informal connections between expatriates, information-sharing systems that had grown up outside official channels, communities of humanity that maintained their own loyalties and their own secrets. Elena reached out to those networks, using the custodian's processing power to identify key individuals and craft messages that would reach them without alerting consortium surveillance. Within weeks, she had assembled a coalition of allies, scientists, engineers, pilots, and soldiers who believed what she told them and were willing to help. The response from the consortium was predictable. Director Vorthen issued warrants for Elena's arrest across all 342 star systems. The consortium's internal security forces mounted a massive manhunt, deploying resources that had never been used against a single individual before. Propaganda broadcasts described Elena as a terrorist, a madwoman, a threat to galactic stability who had to be stopped at any cost. None of it mattered. Elena was always one step ahead, using architect knowledge to predict and evade every trap, every ambush, every attempt to corner her. She moved from world to world like a ghost, appearing just long enough to recruit new allies or acquire new resources, before vanishing again into the void. By the end of the first year, she had built something that had never existed before, a human organization operating entirely outside consortium control, equipped with technology that the galaxy's rulers could not understand, working toward goals that only Elena fully comprehended. She called it the Prometheus Initiative, after the Titan who had stolen fire from the gods. The work proceeded faster than Elena had dared hope. The architect knowledge was comprehensive but not complete. It showed her what needed to be done, but left the details of implementation up to her. And that, as it turned out, was exactly where humanity excelled. Traditional consortium engineering was elegant but conservative, building on 17,000 years of accumulated tradition. Changes were made incrementally, if at all, and radical innovation was viewed with suspicion. Human engineering was the opposite, aggressive, experimental, willing to try anything once and learn from the failures. Elena's teams took architect principles and reimagined them through a human lens, finding solutions that the architects had never considered because they had never needed to. The first breakthrough came in dimensional barrier repair. The architects had approached the problem mathematically, developing complex equations that could modify barrier parameters with extreme precision. But implementing those equations required computational resources that were simply unavailable. The mathematical operations were too complex for any existing system to perform in reasonable time. A young engineer named Raj Patel found a different way. Instead of solving the equations directly, he developed an approximation method that sacrificed some precision for enormous gains in efficiency. The approximations weren't perfect, but they were good enough, and they could be computed in real time, allowing for dynamic adjustment of barrier parameters in response to changing conditions. Director Vorthen and his colleagues would have rejected the approach as too crude, too inelegant, too human. But it worked, and that was all that mattered. The second breakthrough came in power generation. Reinforcing the dimensional barriers would require enormous amounts of energy, more than all the power plants in the consortium could produce combined. The architects had generated this energy through facilities that no longer existed, and rebuilding them would take centuries. A physicist named Sarah Chen found an alternative. By manipulating certain quantum properties of space-time itself, it was possible to tap directly into the fabric of reality, to draw power from the vacuum energy that permeated all of existence. The technique was dangerous, unstable, and potentially catastrophic if mishandled. It was also exactly what humanity did best. Within 2 years, the Prometheus Initiative had built a functioning prototype barrier reinforcement system. It was jury-rigged, held together with creative engineering and aggressive optimism, and it required constant maintenance to keep it from tearing itself apart. But it worked. The consortium's response to the initiative's success was panic. For 17,000 years, the galaxy's rulers had operated under the assumption that they were the most advanced civilization in existence. Their technology was the pinnacle of development. Their understanding of the universe was complete and final. The very idea that a primitive species could surpass them was not just unlikely, it was inconceivable. And yet, here was undeniable evidence that it had happened. Reports flooded into Director Vorthan's office from across the galaxy. Human ships that could outrun anything in the consortium fleet. Human weapons that ignored conventional defenses. Human communication systems that were completely invisible to consortium surveillance. And rumors, impossible, terrifying rumors, of humans performing feats that violated the fundamental laws of physics, materializing objects out of thin air, reading minds across light years of distance, manipulating probability itself to achieve desired outcomes. Most of the rumors were exaggerated or false, but enough of them were true to convince the consortium that they were facing something genuinely new, a threat that could not be countered with conventional methods. The director called an emergency meeting of the full council. "We are at a crossroads," he announced, his crystalline form pulsing with agitated colors. "The human threat has grown beyond our ability to contain through conventional means. Dr. Vance and her followers now possess capabilities that rival, perhaps exceed, our own. If we do not act decisively, they will soon be beyond our reach entirely." "What are you proposing?" the Melodyne ambassador asked carefully. "The final protocol." A shock ran through the assembled representatives. The Chitin Prime's mandibles clicked frantically. The Void Dancers flickered and nearly vanished. Even the normally composed crystalline directors of the other collective worlds showed signs of distress. "The final protocol has not been invoked in 12,000 years, the Chitin Prime said. Its use is restricted to existential threats." "What else would you call this?" Vorthan demanded. "The humans have accessed architect technology. They are modifying the dimensional barriers, the fundamental structure of reality itself. If they make a mistake, or worse, if they succeed in their aims, the consequences could be catastrophic for all of us." "But the final protocol," the Melodyne ambassador trailed off, their skin cycling through colors of distress. "The cost would be enormous." "The alternative is worse." Vorthan turned to address the full council. "The final protocol will eliminate the human threat permanently, while minimizing collateral damage to consortium worlds. Yes, there will be losses. Yes, there will be consequences. But the alternative is allowing a rogue species to control the fundamental forces of reality. Is there anyone here who believes that is acceptable?" No one spoke. "Then we are agreed." Vorthan's crystalline form flared with cold determination. "The final protocol will be implemented. The human species will be neutralized, and order will be restored to the galaxy." Elena learned of the consortium's decision within hours through the network of human informants she had cultivated throughout the galaxy. The final protocol was a nightmare made real. It was a weapon of last resort, developed millennia ago to deal with existential threats. rogue species, cosmic disasters, dimensional incursions. Its specifics had been classified for longer than humanity had existed as a species.
But Elena had architect knowledge now, and she understood what the protocol really was.
It was a targeted, dimensional collapse. By carefully manipulating the barriers in specific locations, the protocol could create localized reality failures, zones where the normal laws of physics simply stopped working. Anything caught inside those zones would be destroyed, not in any conventional sense, but unmade entirely. Their matter would cease to exist. Their energy would dissipate into nothingness. Even the information that had defined them would be erased from the fabric of reality itself. The protocol had been used exactly once in consortium history, against a species that had threatened to destabilize an entire galactic arm. The resulting zones of collapsed reality had taken 3,000 years to fully repair, and the scars were still visible in the cosmic structure of the affected region. Now, the consortium was preparing to use it against humanity. Elena gathered her senior advisors in the initiative's hidden headquarters, a converted asteroid base in a remote system that the consortium had never charted. "We have approximately 6 weeks before the protocol can be implemented," she announced. "The consortium is already moving assets into position. Once they achieve the necessary deployment pattern, they will be able to target every significant human population in the galaxy simultaneously." "Can we stop them?" Raj asked. "We can try." Elena pulled up a holographic display showing the consortium's fleet movements. "The protocol requires precise coordination across multiple points. If we can disrupt enough of those points, we can prevent the protocol from activating." "That means going on the offensive," Sarah observed, "attacking consortium assets directly." "Yes, we've avoided that so far." Raj's voice was troubled. "Once we start shooting, there's no going back. This becomes a war." "It's already a war," Elena said quietly. "It has been since the moment they decided to exterminate our species. The only question is whether we fight back or die quietly." The room was silent for a long moment. "What do you need from us?" Sarah finally asked. Elena smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Everything you've got." The offensive began exactly 3 weeks later. Across the galaxy, human forces struck simultaneously at 17 critical targets: communication hubs, power generation facilities, military command centers. The attacks were surgical, precise, and devastatingly effective. Within hours, the consortium's coordination network was in shambles. Fleet commanders found themselves unable to communicate with Central Command. Power grids failed on dozens of worlds. Military assets that had been positioning for the final protocol were left stranded without orders or support. And then Elena appeared. She materialized on Helix Prime itself, in the very chamber where the Council had condemned her species to death. One moment the room was empty. The next, she was standing at its center, surrounded by a corona of energy that hurt to look at directly. The guards who rushed to intercept her never got close. She gestured, and they simply stopped, frozen in place, their bodies held motionless by forces they could not understand. Director Vorthen was the first to speak. "How?" he demanded, his crystalline form flickering with alarm. "This station's defenses are impenetrable. No technology in the galaxy can—" "No technology in your knowledge can," Elena corrected. "But I have access to knowledge that predates your civilization by orders of magnitude. The architects could do things you cannot imagine, and now so can I." She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of each council member in turn. "You intended to exterminate my species," she said calmly. "You authorized the use of a weapon that would have erased us from existence, not just killed us, but unmade us entirely. Billions of lives, trillions of years of potential, all destroyed because you were afraid of what we might become." "You are a threat," the Chitin Prime said, mandibles clicking rapidly. "Your species represents a danger to everything we have built." "We represent change," Elena replied. "That's what you're really afraid of, isn't it? For 17,000 years, the consortium has maintained stability, the same systems, the same hierarchies, the same fundamental order. And now, here come the humans, refusing to follow your rules, challenging your assumptions, evolving in ways you never anticipated." "Change can be destructive," Director Vorthen said carefully. "So can stagnation." Elena stepped closer to him, and he flinched back despite himself. "The dimensional barriers are failing. Within decades, they will collapse entirely. And when they do, everything you've built, everything the architects created, will be consumed by forces you cannot comprehend." "You cannot know that," the Meladine ambassador said, but their skin was pale with fear. "I know exactly that. I have architect knowledge, remember? I understand the barriers in ways you never have. I've seen the threats that wait beyond them. And I've been working to prevent the collapse while you've been planning genocide." She gestured, and a holographic display materialized in the center of the chamber. Charts and diagrams showing the degradation of the dimensional barriers over time, the increasing pressure from outer entities, the projected timeline to total collapse. 60 years, Elena said. Maybe less. That's how long you have before everything ends. And instead of working to prevent it, you've been trying to destroy the one species capable of fixing the problem. The council members exchanged looks that might have been shock or shame or simple disbelief. "If what you say is true," Director Vorthon said slowly, "then your cooperation is essential. And yet, you have attacked us, sabotaged our infrastructure, crippled our fleets." "I attacked your ability to implement the final protocol," Elena corrected. "Nothing else. Every target we hit was directly connected to your extermination plan. I have no desire to destroy the consortium, just to prevent you from destroying humanity." "And what do you propose instead?" Elena smiled. "Partnership." The negotiations lasted 3 months. They were the most difficult 3 months of Elena's life. More difficult than the research that had started everything. More difficult than the flight from consortium justice. More difficult than the desperate offensive that had brought her to this point. Because now, finally, she had to convince rather than coerce. The consortium's council members were not stupid, whatever Elena might have thought of their moral courage. Once the initial shock wore off, they understood the situation clearly. Humanity had capabilities they could not match, but humanity also needed resources they could not provide alone. Neither side could accomplish their goals without the other. The question was whether they could trust each other enough to cooperate. Elena made her case methodically, presenting evidence of the barrier degradation, demonstrating the technology she had developed, explaining in detail what would happen if the collapse was not prevented. She answered every question, addressed every concern, submitted to every test the council could devise. She also made clear what she was not willing to compromise on. "Humanity will not be controlled," she announced during one particularly tense session. "We will not be managed, directed, or constrained. We are partners in this enterprise, not subordinates. Our autonomy is not negotiable." And if your autonomy leads you to actions that threaten the rest of us, the Chitin Prime demanded, then you deal with those actions as they arise. You don't prevent them by eliminating our capacity for independent thought. That is not how the consortium operates. Then the consortium needs to change. In the end, it was Director Vorthan who broke the impasse. "We created this crisis," he admitted during a private meeting with Elena, "not just by authorizing the final protocol, but by our entire approach to humanity. We saw you as a threat to be contained, not a resource to be cultivated. We feared your potential instead of trying to understand it." "Yes," Elena agreed. "I am old, Dr. Vance. Old enough to remember when the consortium was founded, when we believed we were building something eternal. And I am old enough to see that what we built was always imperfect, always limited by our own assumptions and fears." He paused, his crystalline form flickering with colors she could not interpret. "Perhaps it is time for something new." Elena studied him carefully. "What are you proposing?" "A genuine partnership. Not a merger, not an absorption, but two civilizations working together as equals. Humanity provides the innovation, the creativity, the willingness to take risks. The consortium provides the infrastructure, the experience, the institutional knowledge of 17,000 years." He paused again. "And together, we save the galaxy." It was, Elena realized, exactly what she had hoped for. "I'll need to consult with my people," she said carefully. "Of course. Take the time you need." Vorthan's form pulsed with something that might have been sincerity. "But do not take too long. The barriers will not wait for us to finish negotiating." The partnership was formalized 6 months later in a ceremony broadcast across the entire galaxy. Elena stood at the center of the great assembly hall on the consortium's capital world, surrounded by representatives of every species in the alliance. Before her was a document that had taken dozens of negotiating teams months to draft, a treaty that established a new framework for galactic governance, one that gave humanity a seat at the table while preserving the consortium's essential structures. It was a compromise, imperfect and provisional. Both sides had given up things they valued. Both sides had accepted risks they would rather have avoided. But it was also a beginning. "Today, we take the first step toward a new future," Elena announced, her voice carrying through the hall and across light years of space. "Not a human future or a consortium future, but a shared future, one where every species contributes according to its strengths, where no single civilization dominates the others, where the potential of all intelligent life is nurtured rather than constrained." She paused, looking out at the assembled dignitaries. "The challenges ahead are enormous. The dimensional barriers are failing. Threats beyond our current understanding are pressing against the walls of reality. We have less than a century to accomplish what the architects took millions of years to achieve. Some will say it's impossible. Some will say we should accept our fate and prepare for the end." Her eyes hardened. "They're wrong. Humanity has survived everything that the universe has thrown at us. We have adapted, evolved, overcome obstacles that should have destroyed us 1,000 times over. We are here today not because we are the strongest or the smartest, but because we refuse to give up. Because we look at impossible challenges and say, let's try anyway." That spirit is what the galaxy needs now, not just from humans, but from all of us. Every species, every civilization, every individual who believes that the future is worth fighting for. She signed the treaty with a flourish. "Together, we will save reality itself. And together, we will build something greater than any of us could achieve alone. The architects left us a galaxy full of potential. Let's make sure it isn't wasted." The work began immediately. The Prometheus Initiative, now operating openly with consortium support, expanded to encompass thousands of researchers across hundreds of worlds. Elena's barrier reinforcement technology was refined, scaled up, and deployed to critical points throughout the galaxy. Monitoring systems were established to track the degradation of dimensional barriers in real time. And humanity spread faster than ever before. With consortium resources and architect knowledge, the limitations that had once constrained human expansion were swept away. New colonies were established at a rate of dozens per year. Human scientists worked alongside consortium researchers in laboratories that combined the best of both traditions. Human engineers built new technologies that neither civilization could have developed alone. But the greatest changes were harder to quantify. The presence of humanity transformed the consortium from within. Species that had been locked in traditional patterns for millennia began to question those patterns, to experiment with new approaches, to take risks they would never have considered before. The example of human success, achieved not through following rules but by breaking them, inspired a renaissance of innovation across the galaxy. Elena watched it all unfold with a mixture of pride and concern. "They're changing too fast," she confided to Sarah during one of their rare private meetings. "The consortium species, I mean. They're trying to imitate us, but they don't understand what they're imitating. They see our success and want to replicate it, but they're missing the underlying principles." "Isn't that what we wanted?" Sarah asked. "Change? Progress?" "I wanted them to find their own paths, not to copy ours." Elena shook her head. "Human creativity works because of our specific evolutionary history, our survival pressures, our social structures, our relationship with failure. Other species have different histories, different relationships. They need to develop their own versions of creativity, not imitations of ours." "That sounds like something that will take time." "Time is exactly what we don't have." 50 years after the partnership was formed, the dimensional barriers reached their critical threshold. Elena, now in her late 90s, but sustained by technologies that made such concerns irrelevant, stood in the control center of the galaxy's largest barrier reinforcement installation. Around her, thousands of technicians monitored systems that spanned the entire galactic structure. The moment they had been preparing for had arrived. "Final diagnostic complete," Raj reported. Raj, who had aged alongside her, who had been there from the very beginning. "All systems are operational. Power levels are sufficient. We're ready to begin." "Outer entity activity is increasing," Sarah added from her station. "They know something's happening. Pressure on the barriers is up 17% from baseline." Elena nodded slowly. "That's expected. They've been waiting for this moment for millions of years. They won't give up easily." She looked around the control center, at the faces of the team she had built, human and consortium species alike, working together seamlessly after half a century of cooperation. "You all know what's at stake," she said quietly. "What we do in the next few hours will determine the fate of everything, every world, every species, every life in this galaxy. If we succeed, the barriers will be reinforced beyond anything the architects achieved. If we fail..." She didn't need to finish the sentence. "The architects left us this galaxy as a gift," she continued. "They created species to fill it, designed ecosystems to sustain those species, built barriers to protect them all. And then they left, trusting that we would eventually be ready to take over, to become caretakers of reality itself." She took a deep breath.
We're ready. Let's prove it.
The barrier reinforcement process was not dramatic to watch. There were no flashing lights, no tremendous sounds, no visible signs of the cosmic forces being manipulated. Just screens full of numbers, gradually changing as the equations that defined reality were adjusted. But Elena felt it happening at a deeper level. With the custodian systems integrated into her consciousness, she could perceive the dimensional barriers directly, could sense the pressure of the outer entities, the stress fractures in the fabric of reality, the vast mathematical structures that kept everything from collapsing. And she could feel those structures shifting, strengthening, becoming more robust than they had been in millennia. The outer entities fought back. They threw everything they had against the barriers, waves of pressure that would have shattered the original architect work, attacks that targeted the new reinforcement systems specifically. Elena felt the installation shudder under the assault, felt the strain on systems that had never been tested at these levels. But they held. Hour after hour, the battle continued. Elena's team worked with a focus that bordered on trance state, adjusting parameters, compensating for failures, finding solutions to problems that had never been anticipated. Human creativity and consortium precision worked in perfect harmony, each compensating for the other's weaknesses. And finally, after 12 hours of continuous operation, it was done. The barriers stabilized at levels that exceeded even Elena's most optimistic projections. The outer entities, their assault blunted and broken, retreated to the outer darkness. The fabric of reality, stressed to its limits, gradually relaxed into a new equilibrium. The galaxy was safe. Elena stood at the observation window of her private quarters, watching the stars wheel slowly past. 63 years had passed since the reinforcement, and the galaxy she looked out at was almost unrecognizable from the one she had grown up in. Humanity had spread to every corner of consortium space and beyond. Human and consortium species worked side by side on worlds that neither had imagined alone. The old hierarchies and divisions had given way to something new, not a merger, but a synthesis, a civilization that combined the best of both traditions. The barriers held strong. The outer entities were contained. Reality was stable, perhaps more stable than it had ever been. And Elena was dying. Not immediately. The technologies that sustained her could keep her going for decades more if she wanted, but she had made her choice. "You're sure about this?" Sarah asked. Sarah, who had aged alongside her, who had been there from the very beginning, who was now one of the most respected scientists in the galaxy. "I'm sure." Elena turned from the window to face her old friend. "I've done what needed to be done. The barriers are reinforced, the galaxy is safe, humanity has a future. What comes next, that's for others to decide." The architects transcended when they finished their work. "And maybe I will too, eventually. But not yet. Not by running away from mortality." Elena smiled. "That's not the human way." "What is the human way?" Elena thought about it for a long moment. "Facing things directly," she finally said. "Not running from fear or embracing easy answers. Making choices and living with the consequences. That's what made us who we are. Not transcendence or power or even knowledge, but the willingness to be mortal and finite and still try to do great things." She looked back out at the stars. The consortium species were designed to last forever. They were created to be stable, enduring, unchanging. And that's why they stagnated. Because when you have eternity, nothing seems urgent, nothing seems worth risking. Humanity had maybe a century of technological civilization before we achieved spaceflight. We knew we might destroy ourselves at any moment. So we pushed, we risked, we refused to accept that anything was impossible. And that's what made us special.
Not that we were designed for greatness, but that we were designed for nothing at all, and became great anyway. Sarah was quiet for a long time. "The architects would be proud," she finally said. "I hope so," Elena smiled. "I hope when they look back from whatever realm they've reached, they see what their creation became, and they're proud that we exceeded their expectations." Eleanor Vance died peacefully in her sleep 6 months later, surrounded by family and friends who had gathered from across the galaxy to say goodbye. She was 156 years old, ancient by the standards of natural humanity, young by the standards of the civilization she had helped create. The funeral was the largest gathering in galactic history. Representatives from every species, every world, every faction came to pay their respects to the woman who had saved reality itself. The consortium's council, now including human members in equal standing, declared a day of mourning across all 342 star systems. Director Vorthan, still alive after more than 8,000 years, spoke at the memorial service. "I was wrong about humanity," he admitted, his crystalline form glowing with colors of genuine grief. "When they first appeared in our galaxy, I saw them as a threat to be contained, a primitive species whose ignorance and aggression would cause nothing but problems. I believed that the order we had built, the stability we had maintained for 17 millennia, was worth any price to preserve. I was wrong. Dr. Eleanor Vance showed all of us what we had lost in our pursuit of stability. She showed us that the greatest threats to civilization are not chaos and change, but stagnation and fear. She proved that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is refuse to take risks. The galaxy that exists today would have been impossible without her. Not just because she reinforced the dimensional barriers, not just because she prevented our extinction, but because she showed us how to be better than we were. She changed us, all of us, by nothing more than her own example. And that is a legacy that will endure long after we are all gone. They feared her. Every species in the consortium, from the ancient crystalline collective to the youngest member races, had felt that fear at one point or another. Fear of what she knew, what she could do, what she might become. They were right to fear. Because Eleanor Vance had done the impossible. She had seen through 17,000 years of deception and uncovered the truth. She had challenged the most powerful civilization in the galaxy and won. She had reinforced the barriers of reality itself and saved everything that existed. But that was not why they should have feared her. They should have feared her because she was human, and humans, as the galaxy had learned, were not like anyone else. They did not accept limits. They did not obey rules. They did not believe that anything was truly impossible. And they were right. The galaxy that Eleanor Vance left behind was proof of that. A galaxy where consortium and humanity worked together, where innovation flourished alongside tradition, where the boundaries of the possible were pushed back further every generation. A galaxy that was ready, finally, to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The architects had left instructions buried deep in the structure of reality. Protocols that would activate when certain conditions were met, granting access to the next level of development. They had hoped that their created species would eventually evolve to trigger those protocols. But it was humans who triggered them first. Humans who had not been designed at all. Humans who had evolved without guidance or purpose. Humans who had looked at the universe and said, "I wonder what happens if?" And that question, asked again and again across the generations, had led them from fire to starflight, from stone tools to dimensional engineering, from frightened animals to the saviors of reality itself. The architects, wherever they had gone, would have been proud. And the galaxy they had left behind, shaped by human hands and human minds, was only just beginning to realize its potential. Epilogue. 500 years later. The being that had once been Sarah Chen floated in the space between dimensions, observing the flow of reality with senses that would have been incomprehensible to her mortal self. Around her, vast structures of energy and information stretched to infinity, the framework of existence itself, maintained and modified by the civilization that had grown from the seeds Eleanor had planted. Humanity had not transcended. Not yet. But they had evolved, grown, changed in ways that the architects had never anticipated. They had developed new technologies, new sciences, new ways of understanding reality. They had expanded beyond the Milky Way to other galaxies, carrying their peculiar mix of curiosity and stubbornness wherever they went. And they had inspired others to follow. The consortium species, too, had changed. Freed from the constraints of their original design, they had begun to develop the capacity for genuine creativity. Not as advanced as humanity's, perhaps, but growing stronger every generation. The partnership that Eleanor had forged had become something more, a true fusion of different ways of thinking, a civilization that was greater than the sum of its parts. The dimensional barriers remained strong. The outer entities remained contained. But now, instead of simply maintaining the status quo, the galaxy's inhabitants were beginning to ask new questions. What lay beyond the barriers? What had the architects found when they transcended? What might be possible if the current limits were pushed even further? The humans, of course, were leading the way. Sarah watched them with something that might have been pride, might have been amusement, might have been both. Even after half a millennium, she could still recognize the essential human spirit. The same drive that had led Elena to challenge the consortium. The same curiosity that had made her see what others could not. The same refusal to accept that anything was truly impossible. It was exactly what the galaxy needed. The architects had created the dimensional barriers to protect their work. They had designed species to maintain that work in their absence. They had left protocols to grant access to those who proved themselves worthy. But they had also, whether by accident or design, left room for something they could not have anticipated, something that emerged from the chaos of natural evolution rather than the precision of deliberate creation, something that looked at limits and saw challenges, that looked at rules and asked why. Humanity. They had feared a human scientist. They were right to. And the galaxy was better for it.